The EU's workforce crisis explained. By 2050, the European Union will lose 57 million workers, equivalent to the entire populations of Spain and Portugal combined. This demographic time bomb is already ticking, with consequences unfolding today. Latvia faces a projected 35% workforce decline and Lithuania 33%. These staggering figures represent Europe's most significant economic transformation since the Industrial Revolution. The continent stands at a pivotal moment where population trends will fundamentally alter its economic landscape. In this investigation, we'll examine how this workforce collapse will reshape specific regions, impact various industries, and trigger ripple effects throughout global markets. The coming changes will challenge everything we understand about European prosperity. The demographics behind the crisis. To understand the EU's workforce crisis, we need to look at the raw numbers. Currently, the European Union has approximately 264 million people of working age. But by 2050, projections indicate this number will plummet to just 207 million. A staggering loss of 57 million workers, representing a 21% reduction in the workforce. These figures are based on careful demographic modeling using current population data, birth rates, death rates, and migration patterns. The projections are particularly reliable because many of the people who will comprise the 2050 workforce have already been born. We can count them today. The EU's fertility rate has fallen to critically low levels, just 1.46 children per woman as of 2022. Demographers consider 2.1 the replacement rate needed to maintain a stable population, meaning current rates are about 30% below what's necessary to prevent decline. Think of it like a bank account where withdrawals consistently exceed deposits. Eventually, the balance must fall. Birth rates across the EU have been declining for decades, with a 21% drop since 2002 alone. In practical terms, each new generation is significantly smaller than the one before it. When these smaller generations reach working age, they create a workforce gap that cannot be filled internally. Meanwhile, Europeans are living longer than ever before. Average life expectancy across the EU now exceeds 80 years, with countries like Spain and Italy seeing averages approaching 84 years. This longevity represents tremendous advances in healthcare, nutrition, and quality of life. But combined with low birth rates, it creates a demographic imbalance that fundamentally alters the structure of society. The traditional population pyramid, wide at the bottom with young people and narrowing toward the top with elderly citizens, is inverting. Imagine a spinning top that's flipping over. What was once stable becomes increasingly precarious. By 2050, many EU countries will have population structures that look more like cylinders or even inverted pyramids, with more elderly citizens than young people. As larger generations of older workers retire, they're being replaced by much smaller generations of young workers. The mathematics is simple. Fewer births plus longer lifespans equals workforce contraction. Free movement of workers, one of the EU's fundamental principles, allows citizens to relocate to areas with better economic opportunities. While this mobility benefits individuals and the overall EU economy, it creates compounding problems for countries experiencing outward migration. Eastern and Southern European nations often see their young, educated workers move to Western and Northern European countries with higher wages. In towns across Romania and Poland, you'll find local businesses struggling to fill positions while grandparents raise children whose parents work abroad. This creates a brain drain that accelerates workforce decline in sending countries while partially offsetting it in receiving countries. Bulgaria exemplifies this challenge. Beyond its low birth rate, the country has experienced significant emigration since joining the EU in 2007. Many young Bulgarians have moved to Germany, France, or the Netherlands for better opportunities. This means Bulgaria faces both natural demographic decline from low birth rates and additional workforce reduction from emigration. Similar patterns appear across Central and Eastern Europe, creating regional disparities in workforce decline. While all EU countries will experience some level of workforce reduction, the impact will be far from uniform. Age distribution changes are particularly evident in the working age population, traditionally defined as ages 15 to 64. This group is shrinking as a percentage of the total population, while the 65-plus age group expands rapidly. By 2050, many EU countries will have more citizens over 65 than under 15, a situation unprecedented in human history outside of wartime population losses. The old age dependency ratio, measuring how many elderly citizens depend on each working age person, is expected to reach critical levels. Currently, the EU has about 3 working age people for each person over 65. By 2050, this ratio will approach 2 to 1, placing enormous pressure on social systems and the economy. These demographic changes will impact every aspect of European society, from economic growth and tax revenues to pension systems and healthcare. The labor market will transform as employers compete for a shrinking pool of workers. Housing markets may shift as population distributions change. Public services will need to adapt to serve an older population with different needs. What's particularly concerning is that this demographic shift isn't evenly distributed across EU member states. Latvia, Lithuania, and Bulgaria are projected to lose over 30% of their working age populations by 2050. Greece, Portugal, and Croatia face reductions exceeding 25%. Even Germany is expected to see its workforce shrink by nearly 15%. In some countries, the shift is already visible. Visit small towns in Spain or Italy and you'll find closed schools, vacant homes, and cafes where elderly residents gather while young people are notably absent. Rural areas across Eastern and Southern Europe display abandoned schools, struggling businesses, and communities disproportionately populated by older residents. Young people have migrated either to urban centers or to other EU nations entirely, leaving behind aging communities struggling to maintain economic viability. Urban areas aren't immune either. Many European cities are already experiencing housing market changes, shifts in consumer demand, and labor shortages in specific sectors due to demographic transition. Healthcare facilities face increasing demand from an aging population, while struggling to recruit sufficient staff. Some might question whether immigration from outside the EU could offset this demographic decline. While immigration plays a role in Europe's demographic future, current rates fall far short of what would be needed to fully compensate for the projected workforce reduction. To completely offset the anticipated 57 million worker decline would require immigration levels significantly higher than what has historically been politically acceptable in most EU member states. Multiple overlapping factors are creating this demographic shift. Declining birth rates reflect changing social values, increased educational and career opportunities for women, housing affordability challenges, and economic uncertainty. Longer lifespans result from medical advances and improved living standards. Migration patterns follow economic opportunities and quality of life considerations. The hardest hit, Latvia's workforce collapse. Migration patterns following economic opportunities have created a perfect storm in Latvia. This small Baltic nation has watched its young workers steadily depart for Western Europe since joining the EU, contributing to what will become the most dramatic workforce reduction in the European Union. The numbers are staggering. Latvia is projected to lose over 1/3 of its working age population by 2050, the most severe decline among all EU member states. Latvia's population has been consistently shrinking since 2003, with official statistics revealing an 18% decrease between January 2003 and January 2023, one of the largest relative population declines within the EU. This demographic shift began accelerating after Latvia joined the European Union in 2004, when citizens suddenly gained access to labor markets in wealthier Western European nations, offering substantially higher wages. In the small town of Valmiera, this exodus is painfully visible. Once a thriving regional center with bustling shops and restaurants, the main street now features multiple vacant storefronts. Local business owner Maya Kalnins has watched her customer base dwindle year after year. First my neighbors left, then their children. Now I struggle to find employees for my cafe, she explains. Young people simply don't see a future here anymore. What makes Latvia's situation particularly alarming is the convergence of multiple demographic factors. The country faces a triple threat: significant emigration, an aging population, and declining birth rates. This combination has created a labor market that is increasingly constrained, with fewer young people entering the workforce each year, while the number of retirees steadily grows. This outflow created a brain drain, where the most productive members of society, often those with higher education and specialized skills, leave for better opportunities elsewhere. For a small country like Latvia, with a population of less than 2 million, this loss of human capital has profound implications for future economic development and innovation. The constraints in Latvia's labor market are further complicated by geographic mismatches between where people live and where jobs are located. Job vacancies are heavily concentrated in the capital city of Riga, while regional areas often have higher unemployment rates. This spatial mismatch is exacerbated by inadequate transportation infrastructure and a shortage of affordable housing in Riga, creating barriers that prevent regional workers from accessing employment opportunities in the capital. With each passing year, the pool of new labor market entrants shrinks while the number of retirees grows. This shift places increasing pressure on social security systems, healthcare services, and pension funds, creating fiscal challenges for the government. Family structures contribute to these pressures as well. Latvia has the highest crude divorce rate in the EU, with 2.9 divorces per 1,000 persons recorded in 2022, potentially influencing family formation and stability, which can affect birth rates and population growth. The Latvian government is responding to this demographic crisis with a series of labor tax reforms designed to stimulate economic activity and increase employment growth. These reforms target approximately 95% of the working population by boosting net incomes, especially for those earning up to 2,500 euros per month. One key element is a restructuring of the personal income tax rate, unified at 25.5% for incomes up to 105,300 euros. The government is also incrementally raising the minimum wage from 700 euros to 860 euros by 2028, hoping this gradual increase will help retain workers who might otherwise seek higher wages abroad. Additionally, they've introduced a fixed non-taxable minimum income that will eventually reach 80% of the minimum wage, effectively increasing take-home pay for lower-income workers. These policy interventions reflect the urgency of Latvia's situation. By making it more financially attractive to work in Latvia, policymakers hope to retain existing workers and potentially attract some of the diaspora back home. The International Monetary Fund has taken note of Latvia's situation as well. In its 2024 Article 4 consultation report, the IMF emphasized the need for structural policies to enhance productivity and resilience. Their recommendations focus on promoting training and labor mobility in priority sectors like green transition, digitalization, and healthcare. The IMF also suggests considering measures to adopt technology, including artificial intelligence, and strengthening migration processes to address labor shortages. Gender inequality is another area with potential for improvement. By increasing labor force participation for women between 25 and 44 years of age, Latvia could tap into an underutilized segment of its population and partially offset the effects of its broader demographic decline. The IMF also recommends reducing employment protection regulations that might be hindering labor market flexibility. Latvia's experience illustrates how quickly demographic change can transform a nation's economic outlook. The projected 35% reduction in working-age population by 2050 represents an existential threat to Latvia's economic model and potentially its viability as an independent nation. What makes this situation particularly challenging is that demographic changes unfold slowly but have tremendous momentum once established. Even if Latvia were to dramatically increase its birth rate tomorrow, it would take decades before those new citizens enter the workforce in significant numbers. Latvia's situation raises profound questions about the future of smaller EU nations facing severe demographic decline. Can targeted economic policies like tax reforms and wage increases truly counteract the powerful pull of wealthier Western European economies? Is there a point at which a country's workforce becomes too small to sustain essential services and economic functions? What happens to national identity and culture when a substantial portion of the population lives and works abroad? The Latvian government faces difficult policy choices with no easy solutions. The tax reforms and minimum wage increases represent important steps, but they may be insufficient given the scale of the demographic challenge. More radical approaches might be necessary, including aggressive immigration policies, substantial investments in automation and productivity enhancement, or unique incentives to attract and retain workers. Lithuania's demographic freefall. Lithuania's demographic nightmare serves as a stark warning about how quickly a nation's population dynamics can unravel. Since gaining independence in 1990, this small Baltic country has experienced an unprecedented population collapse, hemorrhaging nearly a quarter of its inhabitants, a decline that continues to accelerate at an alarming rate. This fundamental reshaping of Lithuania's societal structure has profound implications for its future. The raw numbers tell a sobering story. Lithuania's population has plummeted from 3.67 million in 1990 to just 2.8 million in 2023. The demographic equivalent of a ship steadily losing its crew while still trying to navigate treacherous waters. This represents one of the most dramatic peacetime population declines in the European Union. While Latvia faces the steepest projected workforce reduction, Lithuania has already lived through decades of demographic freefall, essentially serving as a preview of what awaits other EU nations if current trends continue unchecked. Lithuania's situation is particularly striking because this massive population loss has occurred despite significant economic growth and integration into European institutions. This challenges conventional wisdom that economic development naturally stabilizes population. Instead, Lithuania demonstrates how EU membership can accelerate population loss when freedom of movement connects labor markets with vastly different wage levels. The exodus of Lithuanians reflects economic opportunity and cultural displacement. Following EU accession, Lithuania witnessed waves of emigration primarily directed toward the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Norway. In the small farming community of Burzai near the Latvian border, nearly every family has at least one member working abroad, leaving behind aging parents to tend family properties. These countries offered substantially higher wages, better working conditions, and established Lithuanian communities that eased transition for newcomers. Unlike temporary migration seen elsewhere, Lithuania's emigration has proven largely permanent, with few citizens returning home even as Lithuania's economy strengthened. This permanent character compounds the demographic challenge, as those departing are disproportionately young, skilled workers with the highest reproductive potential. The fertility picture further darkens Lithuania's outlook. With a total fertility rate of just 1.48 live births per woman recorded in 2022, Lithuania falls dramatically short of the 2.1 replacement rate needed for population stability. This low birth rate reflects profound societal changes, including delayed family formation, uncertain economic prospects, and shifting cultural priorities. This fertility crisis becomes particularly consequential when combined with increasing life expectancy. As Lithuanians live longer while having fewer children, the country's population pyramid is inverting, creating a top-heavy demographic structure with fewer young workers supporting a growing elderly population. Like a forest without new saplings, the demographic landscape grows increasingly barren of youth. In 2022, Lithuania recorded a crude rate of natural population change of -7.4 per 1,000 persons, among the highest negative rates in the EU. This statistic captures both low birth rates and high death rates, 15.1 deaths per 1,000 persons in 2022. Though exacerbated by COVID-19, these figures reflect long-term structural problems rather than temporary disruptions. The changing age structure offers a clear window into Lithuania's demographic future. The share of children and young adolescents has decreased significantly, creating cascading effects. In the district of Rokiškis, 8 rural schools have closed in the past decade as student populations dwindled. Meanwhile, the median age has increased by 3.9 years between 2003 and 2023. Reflecting accelerating population aging. Family formation patterns have shifted dramatically as well. The mean age of first-time mothers increased by 3.9 years between 2002 and 2022, contributing to fertility decline. Interestingly, Lithuania has one of the EU's lowest shares of births to mothers aged 40 and over at just 3.6% in 2022, indicating that delayed childbearing isn't being offset by increased late-life fertility, as seen in Western Europe. The economic implications of Lithuania's demographic collapse extend beyond population numbers. The projected 33% reduction in Lithuania's workforce by 2050 threatens to undermine the entire foundation of the country's economic model. With fewer workers producing goods and services, GDP growth faces structural constraints regardless of productivity improvements. Government revenues decline as the tax base shrinks, creating compounding fiscal pressures. Lithuania's pension system faces particular strain under these demographic pressures. With fewer workers supporting each retiree, the sustainability of defined benefit pension programs becomes increasingly questionable. This creates difficult policy choices between raising contribution rates, reducing benefits, or dramatically increasing retirement ages, all politically contentious options. What distinguishes Lithuania's demographic situation is the limited role of immigration in offsetting population decline. In 2022, just 4% of children were born to foreign-born mothers, one of the lowest rates in the EU. This contrasts sharply with countries like Luxembourg, 66%, or Austria, 33%, where immigration significantly shapes population dynamics. While some Lithuanian regions experience more severe population loss than others, the nation's demographic trajectory points toward fundamental societal restructuring. Rural areas are particularly hard hit as younger residents relocate to urban centers or abroad, leaving behind aging communities with limited economic prospects. This spatial reorganization threatens to hollow out large portions of Lithuania's territory. The government's policy options include targeted immigration policies to attract younger migrants, increasing labor force participation among underrepresented groups, technology-driven solutions for elder care, and recognition of informal caregiving through policy mechanisms like pension contribution credits. Such approaches acknowledge the value of unpaid care work while helping prevent further labor market disengagement by those providing essential family care. Greece's perfect demographic storm. As informal caregivers struggle for recognition across Lithuania, a Mediterranean nation grapples with its own demographic reckoning. Greece's hard-won recovery from economic disaster is now colliding with a startling reality. By 2050, nearly 1 in 3 working-age Greeks will disappear from the workforce. This demographic projection forms the foundation of a second economic crisis already taking shape. Greece enters this demographic challenge already wounded from its decade-long economic crisis of 2010 to 2018. During those painful years, the country endured severe austerity measures, skyrocketing unemployment, and deep social disruption that triggered a demographic chain reaction. The economic collapse accelerated population decline, which now threatens to undermine recent economic gains, creating a vicious cycle for Greek policymakers. The economic crisis sparked a mass exodus of Greek talent. Hundreds of thousands of young educated workers, precisely the demographic needed to sustain economic growth and social security systems, left the country seeking opportunities abroad. This brain drain deprived Greece of vital human capital during its most vulnerable period, with many professionals establishing permanent lives across Western Europe. This exodus dealt a double blow to Greece's demographic future. The country lost current workers and their potential children, births that would never occur on Greek soil. Economic uncertainty made those who remained reluctant to start families. Greece's crude birth rate has plummeted to 7.3 live births per 1,000 persons in 2022, among the lowest in the European Union. This historic low means that in villages like Anavra in central Greece, the local elementary school that once bustled with over 100 children now stands empty, its playground silent. For communities, this birth rate translates to closed schools, abandoned playgrounds, and hollowed-out neighborhoods where elderly residents sit alone in cafes that once hummed with multi-generational activity. As unemployment soared and incomes fell during the crisis years, Greece's already low birth rate dropped further. Even as economic indicators have improved, the fertility rate hasn't recovered, suggesting a deeper, structural shift in Greek demographic patterns. This birth decline combined with increasing life expectancy has reshaped Greece's population. The country now has one of Europe's oldest populations, with a median age of 46.5 years as of 2023. Nearly a quarter of all Greeks, 23%, are aged 65 or older, among the highest proportions in the EU. The aging trend creates immediate pressures on pension systems and healthcare infrastructure. The OECD's 2024 Economic Survey of Greece highlights the urgent need for strong action to create more resilient pension systems. Without reform, fewer workers supporting more retirees threatens to collapse vital social safety nets. This demographic shift affects different regions unevenly. Rural and island communities face more severe aging than urban centers. While rural Greece's fertility rate, 1.57 in 2022, exceeds urban areas, 1.39, it remains far below replacement level and insufficient to maintain vibrant communities. In villages across the Peloponnese Peninsula, some communities now count their school-age children on one hand. Empty homes line narrow streets where elderly residents tend gardens, waiting for summer when grandchildren might visit. The local priest performs more funerals than baptisms, marking the slow fading of communities that have existed for centuries. Island communities that define much of Greece's cultural identity face particular challenges. Many experience dramatic seasonal fluctuations, overcrowded during summer tourism, but nearly abandoned in winter. This pattern makes sustaining year-round infrastructure difficult, further pushing young residents to seek opportunities elsewhere. According to the Bruegel report, Eastern and Southern European countries, including Greece, face the most severe demographic trends in Europe, with a sharp projected increase in citizens aged 85 and older. This superaging phenomenon creates unique healthcare demands that current systems aren't designed to handle. The cruel irony is that these demographic headwinds come just as Greece's economy shows renewed vitality. Since 2021, economic growth has outpaced the euro area average, reaching 5.7% in 2022 and a still respectable 2.3% in 2023. The OECD projects continued growth through 2026. This economic renaissance has been supported by recovery and resilience funds, employment gains, and falling inflation. From catastrophic levels during the crisis, unemployment has fallen to 11.1% in 2023, with projections showing continued improvement to 8.9% by 2026. While representing tremendous progress, these figures remain above the EU average. Youth unemployment reflects both structural issues and the demographic mismatch between education and available opportunities. The OECD recommends strengthening vocational education and recognizing prior learning to mobilize more working-age people and ease growing labor shortages. These labor shortages present a paradox, high unemployment coexisting with unfilled positions. As the workforce shrinks, these mismatches will likely worsen, creating bottlenecks in critical sectors. The question haunting Greek policymakers is whether the economic recovery can survive the demographic earthquake already underway. Can a country with 29% fewer workers maintain growth? Can it support an increasingly elderly population? Can it preserve its cultural heritage, particularly in rural and island regions? The pension system faces particular strain as the worker-to-retiree ratio deteriorates. Difficult choices loom: reduce benefits, increase contributions, or extend working lives. None of these options is politically popular, yet mathematical reality demands action. For rural areas and islands, demographic decline threatens the fabric of traditional Greek life. Communities that have maintained cultural traditions for centuries face potential extinction as young people leave and schools close. The higher rural fertility rate offers a glimmer of hope, but without economic opportunities to retain young families, tax revenue, these communities and public spending will continue. Beyond the hollowing of rural Greece lies a more insidious threat, a fiscal cliff that could undermine the very foundation of European prosperity. The EU's economic model depends on a delicate balance between workers who contribute taxes and citizens who receive services. But what happens when that ratio fundamentally changes? The relationship between working-age populations and public finances forms the backbone of the entire European economic system. When workers earn income, they generate tax revenue through income taxes, social security contributions, and consumption taxes. This revenue funds essential services like healthcare, education, and social security. But this model faces an existential threat as the workforce contracts. Imagine Europe's tax system as a reservoir that supplies water to an entire community. The projected 21% reduction in the EU's workforce means fewer tributaries flowing into this reservoir. As workers disappear, the water level drops. Income tax revenue falls, social security contributions decline, and consumption taxes decrease as overall spending power diminishes across the economy. What makes this situation particularly dire is the simultaneous increase in demand for public services. The aging population requires more healthcare services, elder care facilities, and social support. This creates a fiscal squeeze where governments face both declining revenues and rising expenditures, a mathematical problem with profound consequences. Economic models project that Europe's aging population could reduce the Eurozone's GDP by approximately 4% by 2040. Italy faces the most severe impact, with demographics potentially slashing around 6% from its GDP over the next 15 years. Sectors like hospitality will experience outsized impacts as labor shortages coincide with increased tax burdens to support an older population. The fiscal vulnerability varies significantly across member states due to their different tax structures. Countries that rely heavily on income taxes will face more severe revenue shortfalls than those with diversified tax bases. This creates an uneven impact across the continent, potentially widening economic disparities between member states at a time when solidarity is most needed. Consider the mathematical reality. The EU faces an absolute population decline of 3.8% between 2022 and 2070. Meanwhile, the share of working-age individuals, those aged 20 to 64, is projected to fall from 58.6% of the total population in 2022 to just 51.6% by 2070. In countries like Italy, the portion of the population aged 65 and older will surge from 23.9% in 2022 to 33.7% by 2070. These figures represent a fundamental restructuring of European society and its economic foundation. This demographic transformation will force unprecedented adjustments to pension systems, healthcare facilities, and social support programs. These adjustments come with significant costs at precisely the moment when government revenues are under pressure. Without substantial reforms, European welfare states face the prospect of running structural deficits or drastically reducing the services their citizens expect. The situation becomes even more alarming when examining dependency ratios. The old age dependency ratio in the EU is projected to nearly double from 33.4% in 2023 to 59.7% by 2100. Meanwhile, the total age dependency ratio is expected to rise from 56.7% in 2023 to 83.9% by 2100. These figures translate to fewer workers supporting more dependents, an unsustainable trajectory for public finances. This demographic shift will also fundamentally alter Europe's position in the global economy. The EU's projected population decline after 2026 will impact economic development, innovation capacity, and labor market dynamics. Eastern and southern EU countries face the sharpest challenges due to both natural population decrease and limited inward migration, accelerating economic divergence within the EU. The fiscal implications extend beyond government budgets to include market dynamics. Labor shortages in key sectors could drive up wages, potentially increasing inflation pressures and reducing competitiveness. Meanwhile, consumer markets will shift toward goods and services for older populations, altering investment patterns and economic priorities. Can European welfare states survive this fiscal squeeze? The European model of comprehensive social protection depends on a sufficient number of workers generating tax revenue to support those who need assistance. When that foundation erodes, difficult choices become inevitable. Increasing taxes on remaining workers, reducing benefits, narrowing eligibility criteria, or accepting persistent deficits and growing debt. None of these options is politically palatable. Raising taxes risks triggering emigration and further workforce reduction. Cutting benefits threatens social cohesion and contradicts fundamental European values. Accepting growing deficits risks eventual fiscal crisis. This creates a political conundrum where necessary adjustments are perpetually postponed. We can already see early responses to these challenges. Germany has gradually increased its retirement age to 67, while Poland has reversed previous policies by raising women's retirement age back to 65. Spain has implemented a sustainability factor linking pensions to life expectancy, though political pressure has delayed its full implementation. The median age in the EU is expected to increase by 5.7 years, from 44.5 years in 2023 to 50.2 years by 2100. This aging trajectory will necessitate wholesale reimagining of how public services are financed and delivered. The current social contract between generations may need fundamental reconsideration. The EU faces a particularly challenging period between 2030 and 2050, when the demographic transition will accelerate, but technology and policy adjustments may not yet have caught up. This period represents a critical window during which the fiscal sustainability of the European model will be tested. Countries that fail to implement appropriate reforms during this window risk entering a negative spiral of declining services, emigration of younger workers, and further deterioration of their fiscal position. The pension system breaking point. The mathematical reality of Europe's pension crisis is far more immediate than many realize. That window between 2030 to 2050 becomes particularly critical when examining Europe's pension systems. While political leaders acknowledge the challenges publicly, few are confronting the mathematical reality. Pension systems designed for 20th century demographics simply cannot function when the ratio of workers to retirees falls below 2 to 1, a threshold many EU countries will cross within 2 decades. European pension systems were built on a fundamental premise that each generation of workers would be large enough to support the retired population through their contributions. This social contract functioned effectively when population pyramids had broad bases of young workers and narrower tops of retirees. Multiple workers supporting each retiree created sustainable funding streams for benefits. But this equation is rapidly changing, with the old age dependency ratio projected to nearly double from 33.4% in 2023 to 59.7% by 2100. The underlying math becomes increasingly problematic. This dramatic shift means fewer working age individuals will support each retiree, transforming a once manageable financial arrangement into an unsustainable burden. Consider Maria, a 68-year-old Portuguese retiree whose pension has already seen multiple cuts as her country struggles with one of Europe's highest dependency ratios. Her monthly payment barely covers basic necessities, forcing her to continue part-time work despite health issues. A preview of what many Europeans may face as systems strain under demographic pressure. The burden on working-age Europeans extends beyond supporting retirees. The total age dependency ratio, accounting for both young and elderly dependents, is projected to increase from 56.7% in 2023 to 83.9% by 2100. This means the working population will face mounting pressure to support both ends of the age spectrum simultaneously. Most concerning is the rapid growth in the population aged 80 and over, projected to more than double between 2023 and 2100, from 6.0% to 15.3%. This segment requires intensive healthcare and social services, creating additional financial pressure beyond standard pension obligations. When combined with the overall increase in those 65 and over, projected to reach 32.5% of the EU's population by 2100 compared to 21.3% in 2023, the fiscal mathematics becomes increasingly challenging. The variation in old age dependency ratios across EU member states reveals how unevenly this crisis will unfold. In 2023, the ratio ranged from lows of 21.5% in Luxembourg and 23.2% in Ireland to concerning highs of 38% in Portugal, 37.8% in Italy, and 37.8% in Finland. Countries with already high dependency ratios face the most immediate breaking points in their systems. Several nations are implementing reforms to address these realities. Italy has introduced a linked retirement age that increases automatically with life expectancy. Similarly, Germany has raised its standard retirement age to 67 and implemented a sustainability factor that adjusts benefits based on contributor to pensioner ratios. Sweden pioneered a notional defined contribution system that automatically adjusts benefits based on economic and demographic factors. These retirement age reforms represent one approach to managing the demographic shift. Yet these changes often face significant resistance. When France attempted to raise its retirement age from 62 to 64 in 2023, the country erupted in months-long protests. For 55-year-old Parisian Jacques, who had planned his retirement based on the previous age, the change meant 2 additional years of physical labor and a fundamental recalculation of his financial future. The OECD's Pensions Outlook 2024 highlights concerns beyond demographic ratios. Significant gaps in pension coverage remain, particularly for self-employed workers and those not covered by collective agreements. As workforce structures evolve toward more flexible arrangements, these gaps may leave more retirees vulnerable. Financial incentives designed to encourage retirement savings often fail due to complex tax rules and irregular updates. The OECD recommends simplifying these systems, particularly to benefit lower-income earners who need such incentives most. The OECD has called for a reimagined approach to retirement financing, arguing that flexible solutions providing guaranteed lifetime incomes are essential. This recommendation recognizes that traditional pension structures may not survive the demographic shift. Multi-employer arrangements could address these challenges by pooling resources across employers to improve risk sharing. Investment strategies must also evolve in response to demographic pressures. The OECD emphasizes balanced approaches like life cycle strategies to manage risks while maximizing returns. While equities provide better long-term outcomes, market volatility increases risks for those approaching retirement, particularly relevant when pension systems have less margin for error. Digital tools like pension dashboards are increasingly important for empowering savers. Financial education becomes crucial as pension systems grow more complex and individuals bear more responsibility for retirement planning. What makes Europe's pension crisis particularly challenging is the narrow timeframe for adaptation. The median age in the EU is expected to increase from 44.5 years in 2023 to 50.2 years by 2100. This rapid aging means pension systems must transform quickly, even though retirement systems typically evolve over decades. As pension sustainability becomes more problematic, countries face difficult choices. Increase contribution rates, reduce benefit levels, raise retirement ages, or implement some combination of these approaches. Countries that fail to implement appropriate reforms during this critical window risk entering a negative spiral, where younger workers lose confidence in the system, potentially reducing compliance and accelerating financial deterioration. The coming decades will force Europeans to reconsider fundamental questions about retirement. What constitutes a fair retirement age as life expectancy increases? How should pension costs be distributed between generations? What level of retirement income can societies guarantee when demographic mathematics grows increasingly unfavorable? Policy blind spots and leadership failures. While Europeans wrestle with these essential retirement questions, their political leaders appear trapped in a dangerous cycle of short-term thinking. The disconnect between Europe's looming demographic crisis and the policy responses coming from Brussels and national capitals is striking. Instead of bold, coordinated action to address population decline, we see fragmented, contradictory policies that often make the problem worse. Across the European Union, Migration policy exemplifies this contradiction. Despite workforce shortages, the political discourse has shifted toward more restrictive immigration positions, even among mainstream parties. Far-right movements have gained significant electoral traction with anti-immigration platforms, pulling centrist parties toward harder stances on border control and asylum. The resulting policy paradox leaves European economies desperate for workers, while political conversations focus overwhelmingly on border control. The EU's Common European Asylum System, established in 1999 to coordinate refugee processing, struggles under structural flaws and political resistance. The Dublin Regulations mechanism assigns responsibility to the country of first arrival, creating severe imbalances that burden Mediterranean nations, while inland countries remain insulated from direct migration pressures. When migration peaked in 2015, the EU prioritized external arrangements rather than internal reforms. The 2016 agreement with Turkey exemplifies this approach, outsourcing border management while drawing criticism for potentially disregarding human rights and creating dependencies on non-democratic regimes. The recently adopted EU Pact on Migration and Asylum continues this trajectory, emphasizing border fortification and deportations rather than pathways for needed economic migration. This security focus creates a policy blind spot where regular and irregular migration become conflated, making it politically difficult to implement selective immigration policies that could address workforce shortages. The European policy landscape resembles a patchwork quilt with critical gaps, areas where demographic necessity meets political impossibility, leaving vulnerable populations exposed to future hardships. Where comprehensive coverage is needed, we find only disconnected, insufficient patches of policy. Pension reforms face similar obstacles at the national level. Despite evidence that current systems are unsustainable, the political costs of reform prove prohibitive. Latvia illustrates this caution. While implementing modest labor tax reforms, its proposal to transfer 1% from the second-tier funded pension scheme to the first pension level prioritizes short-term fiscal objectives over long-term retirement security. These incremental adjustments remain insufficient given Latvia's projected 35% workforce collapse. Greece demonstrates parallel tensions between recovery and demographic planning. The OECD's 2024 economic survey calls for strong action to create resilient pension systems. Yet Greek policymakers must balance long-term needs against immediate economic concerns. Tax compliance improvements help address immediate revenue needs, but comprehensive pension reform remains politically challenging despite demographic necessity. At the EU level, coordination efforts lack effectiveness. Brussels has developed awareness of the demographic challenge, but cross-border strategies remain elusive. The EU establishes conditions for entry and legal residence, yet member states control immigration quotas for employment, creating fractured policies where national interests override collective demographic needs. This fragmentation sometimes worsens demographic imbalances between member states. Free movement provisions accelerate population decline in Eastern and Southern Europe as workers migrate to higher wage regions. Without compensatory mechanisms, internal migration deepens demographic divides rather than spreading the burden equitably. The OECD's 2024 pension markets report identifies another troubling blind spot: inadequate pension coverage for changing work patterns. Traditional employment-based pension systems fail to capture self-employed and gig economy workers, creating future vulnerability when demographic pressures will be most acute. Despite this warning, comprehensive reforms to expand coverage remain politically difficult. This pattern repeats across policy domains. Demographic mathematics points clearly toward needed reforms, yet political systems struggle to implement them. The short time horizons of democratic governance conflict fundamentally with demographic trends that unfold over decades. When solutions carry immediate political costs, but deliver benefits only in future electoral cycles, inertia becomes the default response. Public discourse compounds the problem. European citizens rarely hear unvarnished truth about demographic mathematics. That population aging and workforce decline will require some combination of higher taxes, reduced benefits, later retirement, increased immigration, or diminished public services. Political discourse implies that technological solutions or minor adjustments can painlessly solve the demographic equation. This avoidance creates a dangerous vacuum where mainstream political parties sidestep difficult demographic truths, leaving space for populist movements to offer simplistic non-solutions or scapegoat vulnerable groups. The resulting polarization makes rational policy planning more difficult, creating a downward spiral of avoidance and inadequate response. Breaking this cycle of short-termism requires new governance mechanisms that can address long-term demographic challenges despite electoral pressures. Independent demographic commissions with genuine authority, automatic adjustment mechanisms for pension systems, or cross-partisan agreements on immigration frameworks that outlast individual governments could help bridge the gap between political timelines and demographic realities. Without such innovations, Europe risks sleepwalking into demographic disaster, not because the mathematics is unclear or the solutions unknown, but because political systems struggle to implement policies whose costs are immediate, but whose benefits emerge only over decades. Immigration, solution or stopgap? As Europe's governance mechanisms falter, all eyes turn to what seems like the most straightforward answer: immigration. But here's the uncomfortable question nobody's asking. If the EU needed to replace every single one of those missing workers through immigration, would European societies politically accept the scale of change required? The mathematics of Europe's demographic crisis make immigration appear like an obvious solution. While Europe faces a shrinking workforce, many regions globally have young, growing populations eager for economic opportunities. On paper, this suggests a mutually beneficial arrangement. Europe gains workers to support its aging population, while immigrants gain access to jobs and higher living standards. However, the reality is considerably more complex. The scale of immigration required to fully compensate for Europe's projected workforce decline of 57 million people would far exceed current political acceptance thresholds. Recent Eurobarometer data shows approximately 25% of Europeans identify immigration as among the primary challenges facing the EU, making it a significant constraint for policymakers. What's particularly revealing is how Europeans perceive immigration differently at various levels. Survey data indicates immigration registers as a much greater concern at the EU level than at a personal level for many respondents. Could this disconnect suggest the immigration debate is entangled with broader anxieties about national identity rather than direct personal experiences? This public sentiment directly constrains policy options. Politicians across Europe understand that proposing large-scale immigration programs risks electoral backlash, regardless of economic necessity. The fundamental tension between demographic mathematics and political reality makes immigration, at best, a partial solution to Europe's workforce challenges. The EU has increasingly recognized this political constraint and shifted toward a more selective approach. Rather than pursuing policies that would facilitate the large-scale movement needed to fully offset workforce decline, European policymakers are focusing on attracting specific types of migrants who can address particular economic needs. This selective immigration approach targets skilled workers who can fill critical gaps in European labor markets. The strategy represents an attempt to balance economic necessities with political constraints by focusing on high-skill migrants who can make outsized economic contributions. Governments hope to maximize benefits while minimizing resistance. Central to this selective approach is the EU Talent Pool initiative. This digital platform connects non-EU nationals with job opportunities in EU member states, focusing on individuals with skills that match specific labor shortages. For instance, the platform has successfully matched software engineers from India with tech companies in Estonia and healthcare professionals from the Philippines with hospitals in Germany, addressing critical skill gaps while maintaining public support through controlled implementation. However, this selective approach faces significant limitations. By focusing primarily on highly skilled workers, It fails to address workforce needs across the full spectrum of the economy. Many of Europe's most acute labor shortages exist in sectors that traditionally employ middle or lower skilled workers: elder care, construction, agriculture, and hospitality. Furthermore, the selective approach creates global equity issues. By drawing skilled workers from developing nations, Europe risks contributing to brain drain that undermines economic development elsewhere. A nurse who moves from Nigeria to Germany represents a significant loss of educational investment and human capital for the sending country. In June 2024, the EU implemented its new Pact on Migration and Asylum, representing the most significant reform of migration governance in decades. The pact aims to create a more coherent approach across member states, with measures addressing everything from border control to asylum processing. Key components include strengthened border procedures, streamlined asylum processing, and enhanced cooperation with non-EU countries. The pact reflects the EU's ongoing attempt to develop migration policies that balance humanitarian obligations with border security concerns. Critics express significant reservations about the pact's emphasis on border security. They argue that prioritizing deterrence over protection may not address root causes of migration and could potentially lead to human rights violations. The pact's success will ultimately depend on whether it can reconcile border control imperatives with humanitarian obligations while creating pathways for beneficial migration. The varied attitudes toward immigration across EU member states further complicate policy development. Views range dramatically from countries with relatively welcoming attitudes to those where anti-immigration sentiment dominates political discourse. A 2023 Pew Research study found support for immigration ranges from over 60% in countries like Sweden to under 30% in others, a variation that makes developing coherent EU-wide policies exceptionally difficult. These variations reflect different historical experiences, economic conditions, and cultural attitudes. Countries with histories of colonization or extensive emigration often have different perspectives from those with less experience of population movement. Similarly, countries facing acute demographic decline may be more receptive to immigration than those with less immediate workforce pressures. What emerges is a profound disconnect between economic needs and political realities. Economists can calculate with relative precision how many immigrants would be needed to offset Europe's workforce decline. However, the resulting numbers reveal why immigration alone cannot solve Europe's demographic crisis. The scale required exceeds what European political systems currently appear capable of accepting. This disconnect raises profound questions about Europe's future. If immigration can only partially address workforce decline, what other solutions might be necessary? Will Europe need to fundamentally rethink its economic models, welfare systems, and productivity approaches? For individuals and businesses, this means preparing for a future where labor is likely to be scarcer and more expensive. For governments, it means developing comprehensive approaches that combine selective immigration with other policy tools. Europe's immigration challenge ultimately reflects a broader global transition. As more regions around the world complete their demographic transitions and fertility rates fall below replacement levels, competition for mobile workers will intensify. Europe's current situation may presage technological solutions that other regions and productivity will face in coming decades. Beyond importing talent, Europe must consider how to multiply the output of every remaining worker. While politicians debate immigration policies, engineers and economists are tackling a different question. Can technology bridge the gap between 57 million missing workers and the economic output Europe needs to maintain its standard of living? The mathematical reality facing the EU is stark. With productivity growth currently averaging just 1% annually across member states, replacing tens of millions of missing workers would require a technological revolution. The OECD's recent economic surveys highlight this critical need, emphasizing that substantial gains in productivity are essential for basic economic stability. This requires fundamentally reimagining how work gets done. Consider what would be required. If the EU's workforce shrinks by 21% while productivity remains constant, the economic output would decline proportionally. To maintain the same output with fewer workers, each remaining worker would need to produce 26% more, a productivity leap that would typically take decades at current improvement rates. Europe's situation resembles an aging engine trying to power a growing load. Rather than replacing the engine entirely, an impossible task given demographic realities, the solution may lie in adding technological turbochargers to multiply the power of what remains. These technological boosters fall into three categories: automation for repetitive physical tasks, artificial intelligence for information processing, and robotics for complex operations in challenging environments. In manufacturing, the transformation is already visible. At a German automotive plant in Bavaria, a team of 12 workers now oversees a robotic production line that previously required over 100 manual laborers. These robots operate continuously without breaks, maintain consistent quality standards, and handle dangerous tasks without extensive safety protocols. A single worker overseeing this automated production line produces 8 times more than workers using traditional methods just a decade ago. Similarly, in financial services, algorithmic trading and automated processing have dramatically increased output per worker. A mid-sized bank in the Netherlands reduced its back-office staff by 40% while increasing transaction volume by 25% through AI-powered systems that handle routine inquiries across multiple languages and process information at scales impossible for human analysts. However, the potential for technological productivity improvements varies dramatically across sectors. Manufacturing, logistics, and data-intensive industries readily adapt to automation and AI implementation. Other sectors face more significant challenges. Healthcare and elder care, which will see increasing demand as Europe's population ages, rely heavily on human interaction, empathy, and physical presence. While diagnostic AI and monitoring technologies enhance productivity in these fields, they cannot fully replace the human element. A nurse or care worker can only tend to so many patients, regardless of technological assistance. Consider Anna, a home healthcare provider in Portugal. 5 years ago, she could visit 6 elderly patients daily. After her agency implemented a remote monitoring system with AI-powered alerts, she now effectively monitors 15 patients, while physically visiting only those requiring hands-on care. The technology doesn't replace what I do, Anna explains, but it helps me focus where I'm most needed and gives my patients security knowing someone's always watching over them. This sectoral variation creates a complex landscape for policymakers. As the Demography of Europe 2024 publication indicates, strategies must be tailored to the specific characteristics and needs of different economic sectors. Perhaps most concerning is the uneven distribution of productivity gains across EU member states. Countries with a strong focus on research and development and a highly skilled workforce are better positioned to adopt technological advancements. Northern and Western European nations, with their robust educational systems and technological infrastructure, have consistently outpaced Southern and Eastern European counterparts in productivity growth. This disparity means that the countries facing the most severe demographic challenges, like Latvia, Lithuania, and Greece, may be least equipped to leverage technological solutions. Without targeted intervention, this could exacerbate existing economic inequalities within the EU. Successfully leveraging technology to offset worker shortages requires a multifaceted approach. Strategic investments in research and development are essential to develop technologies addressing Europe's specific needs. Comprehensive training programs must prepare workers for a technology-intensive economy, helping them specialize in areas machines cannot easily replicate: creativity, complex problem-solving, interpersonal skills, and adaptability. A supportive regulatory environment must balance rapid technological adoption with concerns about privacy, security, and equitable distribution of benefits. Some EU countries have already begun implementing effective strategies. Estonia's digital government initiatives have dramatically increased administrative efficiency, allowing the small Baltic nation to deliver services with fewer civil servants. Germany's Industry 4.0 program has helped its manufacturing sector maintain global competitiveness despite workforce constraints. Yet these success stories highlight both the potential and limitations of technological solutions. Even in these leading examples, technology has not fully offset demographic pressures, but rather mitigated them. The technology revolution can slow the impact of workforce decline, but cannot eliminate it entirely. The ethical implications also require careful consideration. Job displacement remains a significant concern, particularly for workers in routine occupations. If technological benefits flow primarily to capital owners rather than being broadly shared, they could worsen inequality even while increasing overall productivity. For the EU to successfully navigate its demographic transition, technological solutions must integrate with other policy approaches. Immigration can address specific skill shortages, while family-friendly policies might gradually improve fertility rates. Flexible retirement systems can keep older workers engaged in the economy, while educational reforms can maximize the productivity of a smaller workforce. The EU faces a race against time. Demographic trends unfold over decades, while technology evolves rapidly. The challenge is to accelerate technological adoption fast enough to offset workforce decline as it occurs, rather than reacting after economic impacts have already manifested. Adaptation strategies, a sustainable European future. As the demographic clock ticks, a crucial question emerges. Can Europe transform its workforce crisis into a sustainable future? The answer lies not in finding one perfect solution, but in understanding how seemingly unrelated policies, from retirement flexibility to family support, create a powerful synergy when implemented together. Like a well-tuned orchestra where each instrument plays its essential part, effective demographic strategies combine multiple policies in harmony. Countries successfully navigating population decline orchestrate comprehensive approaches where family support, retirement flexibility, and education policies complement each other. This coordinated symphony represents Europe's best path forward through a challenging but manageable transition. France demonstrates this harmonious approach with its family policy. Their system combines financial support scaled to family size, generous parental leave, and extensive childcare networks. For Marie, a Parisian software developer, this meant returning to work after having twins, knowing affordable quality childcare was available just blocks from her apartment. The results are measurable. France maintains fertility rates significantly higher than most EU neighbors while respecting individual reproductive choices. The success of family policies stems from addressing practical barriers to parenthood. When governments create environments where having children doesn't require extreme sacrifice, through accessible childcare, affordable housing, and family-friendly workplaces, fertility often stabilizes naturally. These policies address the actual reasons people delay childbearing: economic insecurity, career concerns, and logistical challenges. However, even effective family policies take decades to influence workforce size. This reality necessitates complementary approaches that maximize participation among existing adults, particularly older workers. Flexible retirement represents one of the most immediately impactful strategies available. Consider Henrik from Denmark, who at 67 continues working 3 days weekly at the engineering firm where he spent his career. He draws partial pension benefits while mentoring younger colleagues, maintaining his sense of purpose while enjoying more leisure time. This arrangement benefits both Henrik and the Danish economy by keeping valuable skills in the workforce longer. The traditional retirement model, working full-time until a fixed age, then stopping completely, increasingly conflicts with longer, healthier lives. Forward-thinking countries reimagine this transition as gradual. By enabling part-time work with partial pension benefits, governments keep valuable skills in the workforce while accommodating the changing needs of older adults. This flexibility benefits both individuals and economies, expanding the tax base and reducing dependency ratios without burdening aging citizens. The math is compelling. Extending average working lives by just 2 or 3 years significantly offsets demographic pressures on pension systems. Yet flexibility alone isn't sufficient. As populations age, education and training systems must evolve to maximize each worker's productivity. This means continuous skill development throughout longer working lives, especially in strategic sectors facing critical shortages. In Estonia, 54-year-old Lisa transitioned from manufacturing to healthcare support through a government-sponsored retraining program. This addressed her region's nursing shortage while providing Lisa stable employment as her factory downsized. Countries demonstrating resilience to demographic decline have developed such sophisticated systems for retraining adults through partnerships between government, industry, and educational institutions. What emerges from examining these policy domains is a critical insight. The most effective strategies create virtuous cycles. When family-friendly policies make parenthood manageable, workforce participation increases. When education systems develop skills aligned with economic priorities, productivity rises. When retirement becomes flexible, older workers contribute longer, easing pressure on pension systems. Morgan Stanley's research confirms this synergistic effect. Their analysis indicates that combining higher migration with increased female workforce participation could boost GDP by 4 percentage points, significantly offsetting demographic decline's negative effects. This combination proves more powerful than either approach alone. Successful adaptation also requires acknowledging regional differences within Europe. The challenges facing Latvia differ substantially from those in France or Germany. While broad principles apply universally, implementation must recognize each society's unique historical, cultural, and economic contexts. For Eastern European nations experiencing severe population decline, more aggressive interventions may be necessary, including revised immigration policies, substantial pension reforms, and significant investments in productivity-enhancing infrastructure. Countries with milder demographic profiles may follow more gradual transition paths. Addressing Europe's demographic transition ultimately requires reimagining intergenerational contracts. The post-war social model assumed indefinite population growth, with each generation larger than the last. Creating sustainable societies with inverted age pyramids means reconsidering how responsibilities and resources flow between generations. European Commission projections contain both warning and reassurance. While substantial demographic change lies ahead, these transformations will occur gradually enough to allow adaptation. Their assessment that pension spending will increase by only 0.4 percentage points of GDP by 2070 reflects confidence that existing reform mechanisms can manage the transition. What emerges is neither unwarranted optimism nor fatalism, but a clear-eyed assessment of a manageable challenge. Europe's demographic transition represents the continent's defining challenge for the next half-century. Success depends on implementing imperfect solutions early enough to make adjustments as circumstances evolve. The stakes are immense. Societies that adapt successfully will maintain prosperity despite smaller workforces. Those failing to implement coordinated strategies risk downward spirals, where declining populations lead to economic contraction, further accelerating demographic decline. For individual Europeans, these policy discussions translate into concrete life questions about family formation, career longevity, community services, and intergenerational responsibility. The answers depend largely on decisions made today by policymakers and citizens alike. The challenge is formidable but solvable. History shows societies can adapt to demographic transitions when they acknowledge reality and implement coherent response strategies. As we've seen throughout this journey, Europe faces a pivotal moment in its history. The decisions made today will determine whether this demographic transition becomes a manageable evolution or a catastrophic decline. Demographic change unfolds gradually, unlike sudden disasters, allowing time for adaptation if policymakers choose foresight over short-term politics. Will Europe embrace the innovation in economic and social systems needed to thrive? Reimagining European society requires more than policy tweaks. What future do you want to help build? The path forward demands informed citizens who understand these stakes and actively push their representatives towards sustainable solutions that serve generations to come.